Have you ever thought that your job could be so easy that you hardly have to do anything all day? A job where all you need to do is sit down, click a few times, and then have the entire day free to do whatever you want? But there's one thing I quickly realized. Sometimes the easier something is, the more uncertain it makes you feel. I used to think I was lucky, but then I started wondering, am I doing something wrong? My story begins here. When I first started working at this law firm, I thought I was going to have a pretty interesting and challenging job. The company had just decided to move its electronic evidence management system to the cloud, and they needed someone to manage the entire system. They hired me as an IT specialist, responsible for ensuring that all the digital evidence from the cases was transferred to the cloud safely and accurately. On my first day, I was tasked with understanding the current system and workflow. The company had previously been using a traditional storage system with files stored on local hard drives. Employees working in different offices would copy documents onto these drives and then hand them over to a manager. The manager would then check all the files, make sure everything was stored correctly, and then start transferring them to the cloud. Every day they had to deal with piles of files, a task that was extremely tedious and prone to errors. At first, I didn't think much of it, because I knew the company wanted to upgrade the system, and I would help them transition to something more modern. But as I looked at the work I had to do, I realized it was pretty simple. Every day, I just needed to check the files, verify their integrity, and then upload them to the cloud. This didn't take much time, especially once I became familiar with the system and process. I could easily finish my tasks in a short amount of time, but this left a huge gap during my 8-hour work. At first, I thought I would do a few small tasks to fill the spare time, but everything quickly became boring. I would sit there, staring at the screen, checking one file after another, verifying their integrity by creating hash values and then uploading them to the cloud, a job that felt like a daily repetition. After a few weeks, I realized that I only really needed about 10 to 15 minutes a day to complete my official duties. The rest of the time, I had to figure out how to make an 8-hour workday pass by. I began to feel confused. I had been hired to do a job that, in reality, only took up a small portion of my time, while the rest was spent sitting idle and staring at the screen. How could I tell my boss that this job wasn't as hard as they thought? But then another issue popped up, a big question in my mind. They had given me exclusive access to the cloud, and I was the only one who had the ability to perform these important tasks. That made me feel like I had a significant amount of power. Could I do something with this access, or should I just keep doing my job the way it was supposed to be done? This was when the thoughts began to creep into my mind. The more I worked, the more I realized that this job wasn't really challenging, and I started to wonder what might happen if I changed my approach to it. But before I could figure out the answer, an unexpected event occurred that completely changed the way I viewed this job. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, everything at my company changed quickly. Offices had to close, and everyone began working remotely. As soon as the company announced that I could work from home, I didn't hesitate to accept. Although my job was relatively simple and didn't require me to be physically in the office, I still needed to connect to the company's network via VPN to do my work. Up until then, I had always worked from the office, but now working from home was a new opportunity I couldn't pass up. Overall, I felt more comfortable working from home. I no longer had to face those monotonous hours spent staring at a computer screen every day. But it was also during this time that I started to think more about my job. I realized that if I could connect to the network remotely without any issues, there was no reason I couldn't try to make my work process faster and more efficient. One evening, after I had finished my daily tasks, I sat down and started thinking about how to optimize the workflow. I remembered what I had been doing at the office, scanning files on the local drive, checking their integrity by creating hash values, and then transferring them to the cloud. The job itself was rather boring, and I had been doing it passively, but now, with working from home, I couldn't ignore the opportunity to improve this process. At that moment, I decided to write a simple script in Batch, aiming to fully automate my job. I wasn't a professional programmer, but with some basic knowledge of programming and the tools at my disposal, I thought I could create a simple script to scan for new files on the local drive, generate hashes for them, and then automatically upload them to the cloud without having to open each folder and check each file manually. At first, I thought this would just be a small experiment to see if I could make my job more efficient. I spent one evening testing the script, and to my surprise, it worked flawlessly. After a few tweaks, I refined the script to handle all the necessary steps: scanning the local drive, generating hashes, uploading files to the cloud, and verifying their integrity. In just a few minutes, the job that usually took me hours to complete could now be done automatically. The feeling I had at that moment was hard to describe. I could just sit there and watch the script run, and then only need to check the logs at the end of the day to make sure everything went smoothly. Not only did this save me time, but it also gave me the freedom to do whatever I wanted for the rest of the day. But it wasn't always under my control. Even though the job was now completed quickly and easily, I couldn't help but wonder if this was truly okay. Would anyone at the company notice the difference in how I completed my tasks? And if I continued like this, could there be consequences that I hadn't anticipated? Even though I was doing exactly what I was hired to do, a part of me still felt a strange sense of unease. One evening, after finishing my usual tasks, I sat back and wondered if I could make this job quick. I started thinking about how the company used to operate. Every day, I had to scan files, verify their integrity, and upload them to the cloud. But what if I could do that without putting in so much effort? A sense of curiosity began to rise within me. I was the only one with access to the cloud, and as long as I got my work done each day, no one questioned it. But what if I changed my approach? Maybe I could save a lot of time and have more of it for other things I enjoy. After a few nights of thinking it over, I decided I would try writing a simple script. I'm not a professional programmer, but I had enough knowledge to teach myself and experiment. One weekend evening, I spent time researching how to write a script in Batch and PowerShell, tools that were readily available in the company system. I wanted to create a script that would automatically scan for new files, generate hashes for them, and then upload them to the cloud without any manual effort on my part. The first time I ran the script, I was surprised by how smoothly everything worked. All the files were scanned and uploaded to the cloud at the right time, following the correct process, and most importantly, I didn't have to do anything. The script took only a few minutes to complete what usually took a whole day, and I only needed to check the logs at the end of the day to make sure everything was fine. The feeling of seeing my work done without having to do much was truly strange. At first, I thought I was just saving a little time and making my work more efficient. But when the job was completed in just a few minutes without my involvement, I started to feel a bit uneasy. Would anyone at the company notice the difference? Or would they continue to believe I was doing my job as usual? What made me anxious was that I had exclusive access to the cloud, which could lead to potential issues if someone found out. But then I reassured myself that everything was still going smoothly, and I was getting my work done on time. In reality, I couldn't deny that the job had become incredibly easy and automated. What I once saw as a repetitive task had now become a simple process that only required me to check it a few times each day. Still, the feeling of not really working left me with an odd sense, as if I was getting away with something no one else knew about. Maybe this was the point when I started to wonder, I was doing the job the company expected, but was there something bigger waiting for me ahead? A week after I started using the automated script for my job, it felt like I had entered a whole new world. My work had become incredibly easy and time-efficient. Each morning, I just had to check a few lines in the log to ensure everything was done correctly. The rest of the day, I could spend doing other things, playing games, learning something new, or even sleeping in a bit longer. However, one morning when I opened my computer to check the work from the previous day, I noticed something unusual. The logs didn't look like they usually did. Some files hadn't been uploaded to the cloud as expected, and more importantly, there were no error messages. I felt something was off, but I figured it was probably just a minor glitch. and checking the system's details would help me find the cause. But when I manually checked a few files, I realized that some crucial evidence hadn't been uploaded to the cloud. A sense of unease started to creep in. I opened the script again to search for errors, but everything seemed fine. The script was running as usual, no issues or malfunctions were recorded. But the strange part was that those files weren't in the cloud. I double-checked the scanning and integrity checking process, and everything seemed correct. So, I decided to check the files I couldn't find in the cloud, and I discovered something unexpected. Some of them appeared to have been altered or deleted. While I knew that no one else had access to the system because I was the only one with cloud access, I couldn't understand why these files had vanished. The feeling of confusion and anxiety grew. I began to wonder if something was happening that I wasn't aware of. Was someone accessing the system without my knowledge? Or perhaps there was an issue with the company's system that I hadn't discovered. I quickly reached out to a few people in the company to ask about this, but they all assured me that there had been no external interference. The more I thought about it, the more pressure I felt. My job, though simple and automated, was starting to become complicated. I couldn't make sense of what was happening, and it made me feel like I was trapped in a situation that I couldn't control. With each passing day, I grew more uncertain about whether I could continue to do my job smoothly. I decided not to give up and to figure out what was causing this issue. However, I realized something. Over-automating work might bring comfort, but it could also lead to problems that I wasn't prepared for. And most importantly, I began to feel like there was something hidden within this job that I hadn't yet noticed. Since discovering the unusual issues with the files not being uploaded to the cloud, I had become more stressed than ever. And even though I had rechecked every step in the process, the script was still running as expected, but those files were still nowhere to be found in the cloud. Every day, I checked the system again, hoping to find an error, but everything appeared fine. I couldn't explain why the crucial evidence was mysteriously missing. I began to feel like I was caught in a dangerous game, where everything was no longer as simple as it seemed. A growing sense of anxiety washed over me as I realized that not only my job, but the entire system I was managing might be in danger, and I had no idea. Could someone have infiltrated the system and changed those files without me noticing? After several days of unsuccessful investigation, I decided to reach out to a friend of mine who works in tech for help. I told him about the situation and asked if he could check the script. He suggested I use some system monitoring tools to look for irregularities in the process. Following his advice, I installed a few monitoring tools to track the file transfer process more closely. The next morning, when I checked the system, an unexpected alert popped up on my screen. One of the files I couldn't find on the cloud earlier had been copied and moved into a strange folder. Oddly enough, it was a folder I had never seen before in the system. A new wave of worry hit me. Who could have accessed the system and moved the files to a place I couldn't control? Unable to sit idly, I immediately checked the folders and searched for any signs of unauthorized access. Strangely, the system didn't log any unusual logins or actions. But the feeling that someone was tampering with my data was still there. I began to wonder if I had left some trace in the system without realizing it, or if someone had been monitoring me remotely. Although everything seemed fine on the surface, I couldn't feel at ease anymore. I began to wonder whether I could continue doing this job without facing more problems. But one thing I was sure of was that I couldn't keep living with this anxiety and doubt. Something had changed in my work, and I felt like I was now dealing with a situation far more complex than I had originally thought. Now, every time I opened my computer to check the logs, I felt an invisible unease. The job that once seemed so simple had now turned into a tense game, where I didn't know who was behind the screen, and I had no idea whether I could continue this work, while everything became more and more unclear.